Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax, and this is The Story. We're continuing with a conversation Eric Scatterbo had with the late Cy Rogers, who was a leading voice on biblical sexuality and healing from sexual brokenness. As we heard before the break, Cy had an abusive childhood and struggled with his identity and same-sex attraction in his young adult years. Now, here's more of Cy sharing insights from his life.
Back when you were in college, before you were a Christian, some Christians approached you. What can we learn from the way people treated you?
Yes. There were Christians on campus when I was a pagan in school, did not want God, had a bad attitude toward God and church and Christianity. And there were Christians on campus who, they tried to reach out to me. And I think they made a very classic mistake that well-intentioned people often do on this issue particularly. They kept trying to convince me how wrong I was, that God did not want me living like that. And they weren't saying, come to God. They were giving me a moral lecture. At least that's how I interpreted it. So I didn't necessarily disagree with them that the way I lived may have missed God's intent. I just didn't know what to do about it. And, then there were other Christians, and thankfully not many, but there were those, who said things like, don't even bother trying to reach out to him. He can't even be saved. And I thought, where's the hope in God's, character here if that's your representation of him? And I'm glad to be able to say, there are gay people who don't agree with my view on things, but they do know I'm not their enemy. Because I'm nobody's judge but myself. God did not say to me, stop being gay. He said to me, walk with me, Cy. And as I yielded myself to God, bit by bit, a little more and a little more, as I began to overcome my big distrust of his character and learn that he was good to me. Even though I couldn't touch God, I would say to my friends, I could feel him affect me in tangible ways that gave me peace and made me feel clean and inspired hope and a sense that I mattered and that I was valuable to him, though I could hardly believe it. And so I said, I've got to keep on with him. And so that's why I bothered dealing with my sexuality, because I wanted God more than my former sexuality. So here these Christians in college kept trying to argue with me, your sex life isn't right, and they're putting the cart before the horse.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, at that point in your life, you really just needed a friend.
And what if that friend had been someone from a cult? What if that friend had been someone from some different faith than the one that I believe is the way to God? I could have been so very vulnerable because church culture seemed only willing to accept me if I were living a moral life, but how could I qualify for that if I didn't know how to get to God? So I think that they were well-intended, but they were missing the point. My sexuality wasn't the problem. It was a reflection or symptom of the problem. And the people who had the most powerful impact in my life, who were believers, were the people who looked beyond what I did and just valued me. I already knew, if they were believers, what they thought about my lifestyle. I didn't need another sermon on sin. I think I needed to know that in spite of myself, especially because I didn't know what to do about the situation, I just needed to know, do I matter? Do I matter to you? And when I learned that I did, that was very powerful to encouraging me. And that's why I'm so thankful. In spite of how some Christians missed it, there were other Christians who did a wonderful job of loving me. And I attribute the church that I belonged to as a young believer for getting it right. In spite of all they didn't know, in spite of being uncomfortable with me at times, they loved me. They gave me that acceptance, and they gave me that accountability that helped me stay on track in a world of vulnerability and risk.
We're speaking with Cy Rogers, who, as we've been talking about, was a practicing homosexual, but put his faith in Jesus Christ, and for several years had a ministry for homosexuals, but now has broadened his ministry to people who struggle with sexual problems and sexual desires in general. And you became a Christian, grew up, and were raised in the United States, but you went abroad. Can you tell us about some of your travels and ministry?
That's right, Eric. I guess it was just God's plan for my life. You look back in retrospect, I was an exchange student to Brazil. Then later in the military, I spent months abroad in Asia. And then certainly as a Christian and as a missionary. I lived in Singapore for 7 years and then New Zealand for 4. And in fact, much of my work requires that I travel around the world very routinely, 6 continents per year sometimes. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to get to see what God is doing around the world, and even more specifically to the field in which I work. Because humans are humans, needs are universal, regardless of continent or culture. And so as mentioned earlier, I began to get this clue that even though I come from this particular kind of background, the principles that helped me, I find, have relevance to everybody. Everybody is a sexual creature. And I also find as a pastor and as a teacher in Bible colleges all over the planet that, many times pastors in training, they lament that they don't get enough education on this. Even a 4-year Bible college program rarely offers even 1 hour of discussion on sexual redemption. So how can pastors manage their own inner world of risk, let alone disciple other people if they're not discipled themselves? So it's a wonderful thing that I feel I'm privileged to do, to encourage God's family, to teach His people. Again, I don't claim to know everything, but I feel like I've got a piece of the pie, that piece of a puzzle for many people. I can fill up part of that blank spot with understanding and encouragement about God and His redemptive ways so that Jesus can become Lord over this problematic and private part of our lives.
Well, that was a conversation Eric Scatterbo had with the late Cy Rogers all the way back in 2006. But even though it was recorded a long time ago, the spiritual truths he shared and lessons learned from his life are just as relevant as ever before. For example, he warned us as Christians to not put the cart in front of the horse. By that he meant it is not our job as Christians to tell non-Christians they're sinners. Rather, our job is to lead people to putting their faith in Jesus. Then, as they grow in their relationship with Him, He can empower them to overcome whatever brokenness or sins that are in their lives. As Jesus says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And the best way we can do this, I reckon, is to do what we encourage you to do every day on this program. Share your story with others. Humbly share your own struggles of brokenness you've gone through and how the Lord has worked in your life to bring about healing. And then invite them to do as you once did and put their faith in Jesus. There's an old saying that goes, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if we share with others in a caring way, it can go a long way toward bringing defences down and starting spiritual conversations. And this was the approach that Cy Rogers was advocating. Well, if you'd like to learn more about Cy, his website is simply cyrogers.com. That's Cy, S-Y, Rogers.com. Finally, if you'd like some resources on how to heal from sexual brokenness, recent guests Tom and Donna Cole are carrying on Cy's legacy of helping people in this area. As a matter of fact, upon hearing of Cy's death, Tom posted this on his Facebook. Cy Rogers was a man I considered a mentor, leader and friend who passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was one of the most gifted speakers and communicators I have ever heard. He's touched so many lives with his transparency and his knowledge of Christ. We have lost a treasure. I will miss him. Tom and Donna Cole's ministry is called Pure Heart, and their website is pureheart.rest. That's pureheart.rest. Well, thanks for joining us for the late Cy Rogers story and insights. I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you, as always, to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
One day, she was leaving work, and I'm like, "Good night, Rosie," and she said, "Hey, I just want you to know I'm praying for you." And I said, "Wow." And she goes, "I want you to know something else. I love you." And those words broke through the hardness of my heart like nothing else could. And I began to weep. I cried, and I hid my head under a counter because I didn't want her to see me crying. I didn't even know why I was crying, really. But something touched me so deeply, and I thought, I don't know what she's got, but I have to have it.
Tom grew up in the United States and struggled with his identity and same-sex attraction. Meanwhile, Donna grew up in a highly dysfunctional home and also struggled with same-sex attraction. They now have been married for over 30 years and have 4 adult children. We'll hear Tom and Donna share their unique story next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is connecting faith to life.